Hey folks, you're listening to the Writer's Podcraft, where my co-host and I examine popular media and articulate our thoughts about why the story works or doesn't. My name's Colin, and I'm joined by my co-host Lance, and today we're talking about Daredevil Born Again. What happened in this week's episode?
Okay, so here's the recap. After consoling Hector's niece, Matthew investigates Hector's murder, and it leads him to Frank due to the Punisher bullet casing. Matt also questioned Powell about the death, but Powell said that he had nothing to do with it, and Matt could tell that he wasn't lying. Fisk and Vanessa continue their couples therapy, and she reveals her paternal issues. Fisk also tries to do more for New York and handles a leak caused by Daniel. Matt takes on Leroy, a repeat offender, as a client. Fisk has Adam in a cell, and Matt has been training as Daredevil. And finally, Muse is seen capturing victims and making his blood art. So, what did you think about the episode?
I thought this was one of the more standout episodes. I actually enjoyed most of it, which I was surprised by. I thought like there are certain scenes between Matt and Angela, who's Hector's niece, that were well written. I thought the scene with Matt and Frank toward the end was also really, really interesting and actually quite emotional. And there's some scenes between which were just like flat out funny for me. So I was really entertained by the whole episode. But what did you think?
Yeah, I actually didn't like the episode because I felt that it was mostly set up and we didn't get much payoff. And so far, the episodes just have not been that good. So, another episode just built on completely setting up stuff was a little disappointing for me.
Yeah, I see it kind of like marginally differently. I think like plot wise, yes, this was like a heavy setup episode. Like there was nothing paid off in terms of like plot beats, but I found that there were actually some interesting like emotional payoffs.
Hmm.
Obviously, Angela talking to Matt. I thought her talking about how she was like so upset about the system because obviously Matt defended Hector successfully, and yet he died anyway. So she's like, "What the heck is wrong with the system where someone can be proven not guilty in court, and then they're treated like like they're guilty or they're worthless anyway. It's not fair." And I thought that was actually a very poignant scene and kind of interesting because it gives Matt like an opportunity to kind of endear himself to like someone who's like younger, more impressionable. And I found that was like really interesting. There's a scene with Frank toward the end of the episode where he's talking around Foggy. He's trying to provoke Matt to like an emotional reaction. And he starts talking about like if your philosophy is about like not killing, it's about like preserving life because life is precious, then like how could you allow your own friend to die if that's your mission? And I was like, dang, that's kind of like a good point. Like
Is it?
if let's say if Matt had killed Bullseye in like season three, then presumably Foggy would still be alive.
Hmm.
Because like if Punisher was in the same position where he could have, because Bullseye's paralyzed in season three, like there
Yeah.
were easy kill shots on him. Fisk was like defeated; he was on his knees. Matt could have killed Fisk.
Oh,
Narratively,
that's
I'm glad that he didn't kill them, but um, like I like seeing that Frank's ideology is still rooted in some measure of, you know what? There's like a strong point to him. It's not like he's like a straw man. He's not like you can easily discount Frank as a crazy, he just wants to kill everything.
Hmm.
Everything he feels is based off some emotion. He's actually like the most emotional character on the show is Frank. He's motivated by his son's death, where he says like, as I recall, he's got a daughter too who did not get a shot on this episode, and I was like, oh, only the son. But like, he says that his son, he just hears his voice whenever he's like calm or by himself. He hears his son telling him, "You just need to kill all the people who hurt us and who would hurt other people," and that keeps Frank going. I like that a lot. It gave Frank a lot to like an extra layer of interest. Um,
Hmm.
emotionally. And he asks Matt, like, do you hear Foggy? Or he says, I think you hear Foggy as well, because like how could you not? I hear my son all the time. So I know you're like tortured by the same temptations I feel to kill, and that's why I think you're here. And I thought that was actually a very, very great exchange between the two of them. But what are your thoughts on some of those kind of interactions or other interactions in the episode?
Um, I really like the introspection that you're talking about, but I was disappointed by the lack of introspection regarding his fanboys because he just says, "Oh, my fanboys killed someone. That's not my problem." And I feel like it would be more interesting if he actually evaluated how his actions created those fanboys and how people who are copying him could create more harm and do things that he actually does not believe in. And I thought that's where they were going to go in the season, but it doesn't, as of now, it doesn't seem like he's doing that. It seems like he's able to introspect about why he kills people, but he's not able to introspect about the possible negative effects and outcomes and influences that he may have on other people with the way he does his things.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Because I thought for sure that Frank did not know about like the Punisher cops. Like he didn't know about his like
Yeah.
brigade of rogue police. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, I know. I just don't really. I seemingly don't care about this." Like he's like, "Why did you bring this to me, like Matt? Like I don't know, man. Like what do you want me to do, kind of?" And I was
Mm,
like, "Hmm." I kind of feel like Frank will come around some way somehow. He's going to join Matt and try and take down the rogue Punisher cops. So I'm gonna give them credit for now. We'll see how they handle the story, but I genuinely think he's gonna come around to this. But yeah, I do agree, like a little bit more introspection in that regard, because like Frank can really take a lot of shots or make a lot of shots, but he doesn't really take any blame ever. At least in this
mm.
episode, like Matt didn't really press him, and I guess it's just because he's like really emotional. Like Foggy is like a soft spot for him, and he doesn't really know how to come to terms with his own feelings. It feels like it's really repressed in this episode, and Frank really just pushes the right buttons to make it release his emotions about Foggy. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I like how they keep them in conflict instead of just making them all buddy buddy because it adds to the story and adds potential plot points. But sticking on this subplot, so we see that the bullet casing was missing and it had a Punisher logo on it. My first question is, why would they put a Punisher logo on it on the bullet casing? Maybe they're just fanboys. The second question is, was it like engraved into it? Because how did Matt know that it had a Punisher on it?
I wasn't studying the bullet, but it must have been engraved if Matt could like feel the symbol, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, if it was just like painted on, he would not have known what the heck it was on it.
All right, that makes sense. And that's what I thought. But how did he find Frank? I know I don't think you have an answer to that. You under yeah. I don't know.
The impression was kind of strange actually. My only theory is like, did he always know where Frank was? Because he just kind of just strolls up to Frank's hideout, like he already knew where it
Yeah.
was. And you could
Yeah.
say like it's been a year since Matt was active, so he just doesn't keep tabs on Frank because he's not gonna put on a suit, so why should he? You could argue
Mm,
it's like that. I didn't really think it was super clear that Matt already knew where Frank was, or if he was figuring it out as it went on.
I agree.
Seemingly, Punisher was not the person who killed Hector, so I'm not sure how you could find the bullet that's unconnected to Punisher and trace that back to Punisher's hideout, because it's something that came
I
from
agree.
his warehouse. So I just
Mm.
feel like surely he already knows where Punisher is and just kind of visits him from that.
I don't like how we have to assume that. But then the next thing that we have to assume is, at least on my part, what is Frank's situation with his Punisher identity? Because Matt said he was hiding, and he called him a victim. So does that mean that the Punisher's retired? But then he asked, "Are you plotting your next kill?" And Frank confirmed it. So does that mean he's not retired? And then Matt said that Frank could serve. Frank could serve. And I assume that means like as a hero. And then Frank mocks his hero work and he says the candy ass hero stuff. So does that mean that Matt was asking him to suit up as Punisher and serve? And if that's what it means, then does that mean Punisher's retired? I don't understand if Punisher is retired or not and what exactly Frank is doing and what his situation is. Did you understand?
I think what he was trying to say is like Frank is hiding low, like laying low, like from police from attention because he would get arrested if he was coming out of hiding. Like Matt can go out of hiding and it's no big deal because no one thinks Matt is Daredevil. Frank goes out of hiding, everyone knows you're on the run for like 50,000 murders. So like he's saying
Wasn't
that,
he doing
but
that in
also
season 1 and 2 of The Punisher?
yes, yes.
Or was you mean he was laying low in those? Because I
He
mean,
was
he was
laying
walking out in
low in
public.
those episodes.
Okay, okay.
I mean, he wore a hoodie sometimes, I guess.
Hmm.
I mean, but
So,
also,
okay, yeah.
um, he was talking about being service, like I like being of service. I presume he means like Matt is or was as a hero. If you were like non-violent, not non-violent, if you're a non-killing, non-lethal like superhero, then you could be like on my side, you could be good like me. And Frank is like, I don't want to hear about this. Like I do not do that. That's not my brand of justice.
So is Frank still a superhero?
He's still active, if that's what you mean. He's still
Yeah.
active.
Okay. But why did he say you could serve? That sounds so vague. That makes it sound like he's not a superhero at all. It makes it sound like he's not doing anything.
Well, I think he means like serve like how I used to serve. Because like the way he sees Punisher who kills villains as like a bad thing. He does not see that as a good thing. So
Right.
he's like, you're not really serving, you're serving yourself maybe is you're self-serving is what Matt thinks. You're not serving the public like I am. or I used to at least, right? That's how I read the scene.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that vagueness because to my memory, the other seasons, like when they talked about things, it was very specific and you would understand exactly what the character was saying. And then I like Matt asking Frank for permission to kill someone because at first I was like, what is he talking about permission? But then by the end of the scene, he starts saying that Matt feels guilty about not killing Bullseye and just putting him in jail. And that's what he says. He got life. And he said, what about Foggy? Did he get life? That was really good dialogue. So I do like the way they're developing Matt and they're reusing characters that had internal conflicts related to him to develop him. So I do like that part of the scene.
I don't know. I just think it's really, really strange that Punisher doesn't have a reaction at all to the corrupted cops using his symbol.
Yeah, that was disappointing.
Like, I actually just think it's honestly out of character. In fact, like, wasn't it a huge selling point about Punisher in this season that he's going to be fighting people who misuse his symbol and ideology, both in the real world and the story world? Like, wasn't that like the whole selling point of Frank?
Yeah, I saw an interview about that.
I mean, I still like the scene. I mean, I rewatched it today. It holds up. It's a great scene. He says that, like, he's making fun of Matt basically for letting Foggy die to Bullseye. But
Did he get life? Yeah.
yes, I mean, it's such a good. Wait. He said that Bullseye killed Foggy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was in episode one, which I thought was entirely reshot. Like, that's not in the original draft at all, right?
Does Foggy die in the original draft?
Well, no, the Bullseye killing Foggy. Isn't that like a new thing? Like, in fact, wasn't like the original leak that a corrupted cop kills Foggy?
Wait a second. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so Frank referencing Bullseye killing Foggy, which is a reshoot,
Hmm.
means that this scene has to be a reshoot because it comes after the reshoot was written and shot.
Shoot, you're right.
Is this why Frank acts out of character? Is this like literally the reason why he says he doesn't care about the corrupted cops like
Oh,
using
I
his
see. I
symbol?
see. I
It's because
see.
they already shot the rest of the season
And it
and he
doesn't
does not
appear yet.
show up until the very end. So he cannot care because they literally shot already. Is that where we're at?
Yeah. That would make sense. And he would have to
That's
show up in the
crazy.
next episodes if he actually cared, but he doesn't.
Exactly.
He's set in stone.
If he acts in character and says, you know what, Matt, I need to do something about this, there will be an expectation on the audience that he shows up for the next couple episodes. And since they already shot those episodes, he cannot show up.
Mhm. That makes sense. That's a
Wow,
good discovery.
that's crazy.
So you think it made the story better or worse?
I, I mean, I still think the dialogue was a good exchange, but now it's now you need to give a very good reason why Frank will suddenly care at the end when he didn't care before.
Mm. Yeah.
Because it's like circumstances have to change in such a way where Frank feels like something like his like personal limits were crossed. Now he needs to get involved because right now I don't know why he wouldn't get involved. In fact, it feels kind of out of character that Frank would not try to stop people using his symbol to commit acts of villainy and corruption.
Mhm.
Is there anything else about the Punisher scene you want to touch on? Because I have like a bigger idea that involves the scene, but it's going to sidetrack a little bit.
I just wanted to add that I like the way that Punisher actually presses Matt instead of just Matt pressing Punisher. Because like this is Matt's show, but it is nice to see him get pressed by someone else who's actually in the right. But that's all. What did you want to add?
Yeah, really quickly to add on to that point, I feel like it's always interesting when I won't say the main character of the show, but like the main character of the scene is like challenged. It could be through dialogue, it could be through like plot action. Like when someone's pressing their belief about something or is trying to prevent their intent. And in previous episodes, we saw that with like Fisk and Commissioner, I want to say Gallagher, the police commissioner, who was just like resisting Fisk's like whatever he was trying to do. And to your point, Frank was resisting and challenging Matt really well in this scene, and I think that's why this stood out so much, and I thought was really rich. The
Mhm.
bigger kind of idea I want to say is that this episode really touches on like the system of New York. The Angela scene touches on the court system, and there's a system about that's also about the court. It's the Leroy stuff. Leroy, I forgot his last name. It's not really that important, but
Jenkins?
Matt is charged with taking care of. defending Leroy, who's like accused of stealing like 5 units of caramel corn from like a bodega shop. And Leroy's insisting, like, I want probation. I cannot spend any amount of time in jail. Like 1 day is too much, basically. Like I cannot spend any amount of time in jail. Because the last time I was in jail, they took me off Social Security, or not Social Security, it was like food stamps or
SSI.
something. Hmm?
He missed his SSI appointment.
So he was missing his benefits, is basically the point, right?
Yeah.
And that's why he's like, it costs way more to keep me locked up than to feed me, and yet like the system would rather keep me locked up. So there's the system theme again. We have Angela talking about the system that does not protect people, right? Then there's Leroy who's saying the same exact thing. Then you got Frank saying the same exact thing. He's like, you need to like start killing people. So then, because when the system like gets its hands on people, it does not adequately like solve the problems. And we see that from his interpretation, the system failed Foggy because Foggy died from someone who was already incarcerated. So he's like, how could you defend the system? And Leroy's asking Matt to kind of rail against the system instead of taking like a good deal. He would rather Matt just like go balls to the wall and just try to get him off the case completely or beat the charge completely, which seems kind of far-fetched, but
Wouldn't that
that's
be
what
using the
Leroy
system though?
wants. I mean, arguably, yes, but it's like he's not conforming. Like that's the whole thing. It's like they're all not conforming, right? Like, Frank is not conforming to the system, obviously. Leroy should have taken like a cop-out deal, right? Like 10 days was what the prosecutor offered, and it was a good deal considering like he has like so many prior
Priors.
convictions. So he was just like, I won't take anything. I won't take 10 days. I will not. I just need probation. I cannot be in jail for any amount of time. So he's not conforming. And then you have Angela, who seemingly we're sowing the seeds that she might become a superhero, like her combo counterpart, where she does not want to allow the system to handle criminals because sometimes the criminals are the system. Sometimes it's crooked cops who are the problem. And she's like, there needs to be a better solution than what we have. So there was a very intricate layer storytelling here, and I did enjoy this kind of like commentary subplot. Not every single second of it I enjoyed, because I thought Leroy was kind of entitled in his monologue. He comes across like kind of unsympathetic, even though he has
Wait, hold on.
valid point what he's
Okay.
saying.
I want to come back to that, but before there, I want to ask what are your predictions with this whole system theme idea? Where do you think the story's gonna go? What do you want to see?
Okay, so what do I predict to see versus like what
Yeah.
I anticipate
Prediction
will happen?
first.
Okay, so
Prediction first. Yeah.
prediction. I don't think Angela will become the White Tiger in this season. Maybe next season, maybe in a spinoff. I don't know. I definitely think it's going to happen at some point because her scene was like really good. And like the actress has like some good chops, acting chops. So I don't think we'll see, there are too many ideas. We can't put like every person's like origin in this show, and I wouldn't want them to anyway. But I do think she will have it eventually. I anticipate that Matt will get Leroy. Um, he'll get him clear. I don't know how he's going to do it. It's going to be some kind of maybe it'll be like a moment of legal brilliance that I feel like was lacking in the Hector Ayala trial. That he's going to get
I doubt it.
Leroy acquitted. We'll see. I do see that. I'm kind of optimistic for Leroy in that sense. The Frank thing I think is the most interesting by far, which is like, will Matt really try to? Will he
Kill.
seriously consider killing? Is that really where Matt's going to go? Because that's what Frank's argument is. I think he'll consider it, but ultimately he won't do it. Kind of like how he always like pump fakes on those killings. He
Mm.
always says like, "Oh, I'm really gonna do it this time," and then ultimately he doesn't. But what do you think? What are your predictions?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, I think Leroy is gonna go to jail, and then that's gonna make him doubt the system more. I think Frank is gonna go back to killing. I also think that Daredevil's gonna have a moment where he considers really killing someone. But what I would like to see is that maybe there's some middle ground where Daredevil is able to defy the system but not kill someone, but find a solution that is better than both of them. I think that would be really cool, but I don't know how they would do that. What would you like to see?
We just had ideas we were talking, which is about the system which is in place. Because the system did elect Mayor Fisk, right? So
Yeah,
there are valid criticisms to anyone who has detractions or differing opinions about how the system works, if it's good or not. Like in the universe of Daredevil, like Fisk did win the election, and from what we can tell, it was democratic. There was no like tampering or anything. He is the choice of the people. So it's another kind of like layered part of this like overarching argument about the efficacy of the system. But what was your question again?
What do you want to see?
I think I want to see, just from a narrative perspective, I want to see Matt challenging his beliefs, and I think part of challenging him is him considering other perspectives, which it involves killing. If Matt seriously
Mm.
considers killing someone, I think that will be I'll be satisfied with that. I don't know if I actually want him to kill anybody, but if he starts considering alternative solutions to his problems, I'll consider that like okay, Matt's like reaching a breaking point. And that's what we want to see from our main characters. We want to see them hit breaking points, like push to their limits. So that's definitely what I want to see.
Didn't he already consider killing in the first episode?
Yeah, that's the thing. It like it's hard to put the genie back into the bottle because he tried to kill Bullseye in the very first episode. And yeah, that kind of like takes the wind out of our sails a lot. But if you just kind of like ignore that and just be like, all right, he's gonna reconsider. And maybe you could argue like planned, premeditated murder, kind of like what he does to Fisk in season 3, where he tries to literally go to his hotel room to like strangle him when he's not looking. And the Bullseye one was like more instinctive. He was like more like raw emotionally because he like hears Foggy die. So he's like, Whatever." But it was kind of spur of the moment. It was not ultimately like him choosing really to kill him.
So earlier you were talking about the Leroy scene, and I cut you off. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I was just wrapping up my point about Leroy, where I understand like it's wrapped up in a deeper story about the system, and that's seemingly the kind of one of the main themes of about this episode and maybe even the series. But I found them be kind of like an unsympathetic character, and maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's supposed to be like a realistic depiction of people you encounter in the real world. Like they're not always like rosy and cute and rootable. Sometimes they're just like pains in the butt. So maybe it's like a deliberate choice, but I gotta say it was kind of hard to kind of listen to Leroy. Like he's just rude to Matt. He makes fun of him for being blind no less than 5 times the first time he meets him. So just a little casual, so, like right off the bat for the guy defending you between going, like, why would you insult the guy who's defending you from going to jail, maybe? Like, that
I
seems to
don't
be
know.
like not the smartest move ever.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, if I were Matt, I'll be like, 35 days, that was the best offer, man. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
Like you get a free attorney, and what you're gonna do
Mhm.
is like make fun of him. Like, come on, man.
Mm. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I had the exact same word. I said, Leroy is so unsympathetic. He does so many bad things. Okay. So right off the bat, he immediately lies about not stealing the food, and he keeps lying about it until Matt is like, actually, the cameras caught you, so we know for a fact that you were stealing it. And then he used the dumb excuse, I paid for it last week. That doesn't even make sense. Like, not only would it not hold up in court, it wouldn't hold up to anyone, like even just a regular person on the street. Then he says that everyone else is lying. So it's just everyone else's fault. He has no accountability. Then he tries to use the scroll defense, and it feels like he's just this comedic relief idiot who's just throwing out a bunch of stuff. He sounds like a kid who's trying to lie about how he didn't actually steal something. And this is a grown man. So that's really making him less sympathetic. Then he insults Matt's blindness, as you said, even though this is the guy that's trying to help you. So, like, what are you doing? And his inability to understand his situation is very frustrating because he's like, oh, I need probation, but he does not understand how the law works. He doesn't understand his priors. He asks, why are you bringing up my priors? Do you not understand that all those crimes that you did in the past are going to influence the judge's situation? Like, Matt has to explain basic things to him. He sounds like a child, and it's hard to feel sympathy for a grown man who's disrespecting the person who's trying to protect him and then is acting like a child and holding no accountability. But then in the second half of the scene, he does make some good points about how the system has flaws, like how they pay more to lock him up than to actually feed him. But my response is that two wrongs don't make a right. He doesn't really take accountability for his own mistakes. He doesn't acknowledge that he was actually trying to steal. And then he said, last time they locked me up for 30 days, I missed my SSI appointment, which cut off my benefits, and it's hard to get them back. That's a good point. That is sympathetic, but the problem is he kind of just skipped over why he got locked up for 30 days in the first place. What were you doing that led you to getting locked up? Like he has
I
accountability in the
stole more caramel
situation.
corn.
You said what?
He probably stole more caramel corn.
It
A sweet treat.
it frustrates me because he's not looking at the start of the problem. He did something wrong, and then the system did something wrong, and then he's like, "Oh, the system is all wrong." Okay, but what about what? What did you do? That's my problem. He lacks accountability, and then he says, "Oh, well, I was eating a bunch of trash and I wanted dessert, so I stole something." Okay, I understand that you eat only bad food, and it's sympathetic that you would want something health. You want something that tastes better, but committing a crime is not the answer. Two wrongs don't make a right, and it's hard for me to feel sympathetic for a character that can't even acknowledge his own accountability. Yeah, that's the main thing I have to say about him.
Yeah, and I don't want to like kind of belabor this point too much, but like, caramel corn is obviously a treat. It's not water. Like it's not
Mm,
sustenance.
hmm
Like if you just make some minor alterations to what Leroy was doing, where he was like, I mean, this is such a cliche, but let's just say Leroy has a daughter and he's stealing like formula. Like it's a cliche, sure, but like at least we'd
hmm
be like, well, it's not a self-motivated crime. It's like for his daughter. It's sympathetic. We can be
hmm
like, we don't want to see a father be taken off the streets. Like can't provide for his daughter for a month. That would not be cool. But like stealing caramel corn, I'm just like, come on, man. Like maybe that's the point. Maybe it's deliberate. Maybe it's supposed to be like
Yeah,
an unperfect person of who's the main character now who needs defense, and it's just like that's life. Like it's not always like the perfect person you want to kind of be your avatar for your social cause. But in this case, it was just hard to really support him because he's just not a perfect person.
I also
And he's got a
didn't
lot
like
of things.
Matt saying he's right. He's like, oh, he just sits there, listens to him. He's like, you're right. No, he's not right. He didn't push back on any of the stuff he said. He's like, oh man, I feel guilty because this guy's he's a individual who's struggling. He's poor. I can't say anything back to him. Yes, you can. Tell the man to take accountability. I didn't like that because it felt like the writers were justifying everything that Leroy said by not having the main character, who's literally a lawyer, say anything back to him. I really didn't like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, earlier I remarked that scenes are really good when one of the protagonists, or I don't even say protagonist, one of the characters is like being his ideology or his viewpoints or his desires are being pushed back against by the other person in the scene. That's how you make
Yeah.
scenes interesting, right? And
hmm
Matt rolls over for Leroy. Like we
Yeah.
found like so many arguments against what Leroy said and what he believes, and Matt's smarter than us, I'm sure. He could have thought
hmm
of any of those things and he just doesn't say anything. Um, it made Leroy even more unlikable. It made
hmm
the conflict non-existent because Matt just rolls over and
It
it's
felt kind
rather
of preachy as well.
undynamic. Yeah, like if
But
you're
then when you look at
constructing
Frank,
a strong,
it doesn't happen. They
exactly, like
both go
Frank was the
back and
exact
forth.
opposite. They're like people are resisting each other's ideologies, right? Leroy was just like, okay, it's the Leroy show. Like whatever you have to say, like we're just gonna hear you out. It's like city council. You got 2 minutes to speak on the microphone. No one's going to interrupt you. But after 2 minutes, we take the microphone away from. It's like, okay, like it's just a little silly and rather undynamic and really unstimulating. Even if he was raising good points, I feel like this fact that we did not challenge his points at all sort of takes away from his overall arguments.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, let's just say, like, forecasting for next episode, I would enjoy if someone else, maybe Sophia, the prosecutor, makes those points, like if there's a trial or they're from a judge and they're like, well, all these reasons why you have other convictions, like you clearly, like a slap on the wrist isn't working for you, so maybe you need more than 30 days in jail. Maybe you need like incapacitation. But I want to really quickly dovetail into another talking point, which is Matt's interaction with Sophia. I thought was kind of interesting as well. Like they sort of debate philosophy just a little bit, not a lot, but just enough where I'm kind of interested in there's resistance. This is what we're talking
Mm.
about. There is some conflict. She wants to give him 30 plus days. Matt wants probation. And over the course of their interaction, he whittles her down to 10 days, I think. 10 days. And they start talking about like what works better or what doesn't work, incapacitation or deterrence. Like these are like flawed ideas of sentencing goals, and I thought that was interesting as well. We got a little peek into like what Matt believes, which is always interesting beyond what he's just saying, like what he cares about, his viewpoints on things, his morality. I thought that was they just backdoored a
Does
really
he?
interesting point to
I
him.
felt like he was maybe just arguing for his client. He was just saying anything to. get his client what he wanted.
I mean, I got the impression that he did believe what he said. I mean,
Hmm.
he's a defense attorney primarily, right? So I'm sure he's got lots of like flaws with like sentencing goals or like how the system works, right? I'm sure he would rather have some more breaks for the accused than already exist.
Hmm.
So I felt like he did believe what he was saying. And that made the scene so much more interesting because they were going back and forth, resisting each other's viewpoints until there's a compromise. But yeah.
All right. So next, I want to go to Vanessa and Fisk. Did you add anything to say about couples counseling?
I don't really have anything too much to say about the counseling itself. I do have a point to say about Adam. I'll save that for a bit later, but what do you want to talk about?
I just wanted to cover that I liked the development that they gave Vanessa. Like she had an unreliable father, and she was seeing that unreliableness in Fisk, and that's why she cheated. I thought that was good character development.
I thought that was kind of weird actually, because like that was when he was shot, right? That's what she was talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
I was like, girl, he was shot in the face. That's like I
That's
saw
a fair point.
instability. Like you shoot anyone in the face, I promise you, you'll see some instability right afterwards. Like
Yeah, yeah.
if you had to try to force this angle to work, I would rather if you retcon that in season three when Fisk had put her in Europe, right? And he was
Hmm.
gone, right? Because he wanted to, I don't remember the particular reason, but he was like leave her in Europe. Eventually, he tries to bring her over because he was afraid of like rival gangs or American prosecution getting her. It was, as I recall. Eventually, he brings her back for season three to get the wedding, but before that, she was all by herself for like 1 or 2 years. If you want to argue like Wilson, you were in prison and like I needed something, right? I needed someone and you were
Hmm.
unavailable because you were in prison. That's different. I could maybe see that point, but like he got shot in the face was not like really that's not a cheating excuse. Like that's horrible. Like as you were recovering for getting shot in the face, like I found a new lover. Like that's not giving. No.
Mm, don't say that. Um, Next one is you said you wanted to say something about Daniel.
Daniel, yeah. I always like it when shows treat their side characters like main characters. In fact, the original Daredevil show did this very well. A lot of the time with Nadine, with Karen, with Foggy, like they really felt like the main characters whenever they were on the scene. And in this scene, it was not really as well handled as before, but it was still interesting. I like seeing Daniel like when he's not at work. It was just a fun way to kind of define his character when he's not working for Fisk and we see like what he's doing and yet even when he's not at work he's still thinking about work, which I think was kind of an interesting point about Daniel. He's still devoted to Fisk. He slips up and leaks the secret about the union busting, but ultimately he's still loyal to Fisk, and I think that kind of, despite his slip up about the leak, it still endears him to Fisk ultimately. But what did you think?
The subplot, I think it has good character development, but what I'm worried about is like the actual relevance to the plot. So Fisk was going to this port called Red Hook, and he wanted to fix it. And they show all the scene does a good job at showing what the characters value because Fisk just wants to jump past all the hurdles and just immediately get to work. But then Sheila Rivera, the woman, is like, you can't do that. You have to actually do all these things. Like she sticks to the rules, while Fisk wants to break the rules and just immediately do what he wants. And then Daniel Blake, he's like the meat writer. He just says, "Go, go, Fisk." Do he just supports him on whatever he does? So like, it's good development. But my question is this red plot? Is this red port actually going to be relevant to the story, or are we just building character? Because I feel like there's a way you can build character while actually progressing the plot. So that's what I'm worried about this. And then there's the Union Buster article as well. That Daniel messed up and then he shows his loyalty to Fisk, and Fisk is like, I appreciate that loyalty, but you do that again and I'm gonna kill you. Once again, I like the character development, but my problem is this Union Buster article even gonna have any relevance in the plot? Because both of these Redport and Union Busters, they don't feel like they're gonna be relevant. It feels like these are just one-off things, episodic things that are there to develop the characters, and I would rather that the story actually develops the characters in scenes that are relevant to the plot, like doing two things at once instead of just doing one thing and having the and then throwaway scene.
Yeah, like a different way of, I think, saying what you just said is like in Daredevil season three, which I rewatched recently, I noticed that like the A and B stories and even the A, B, and C stories in some cases, or the B and C stories would just merge at a certain point in the episode.
Mm.
And right now we're just watching Fisk. I happen to like the Fisk arc, not arc, the scenes about Fisk in this
Subplot.
episode,
Hmm.
subplot. I did enjoy them, but I do acknowledge that they're not technically refined. Like the subplots were not really merging into themselves. Like it was the Daniel story, which is not really strong enough to say it's a different subplot from Fisk. It's pretty tethered. The article coming out was also besides the nightclub scene. I don't think we see BB at all in this entire episode, besides the nightclub.
No, we don't.
So effectively, like we're speed running, which is a word I've used a lot to describe this
Yeah,
show. We're
I agree.
speed running to get to a point where Fisk gets angry at Daniel, but ultimately Daniel still perseveres.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like things are happening because we need certain results to happen from the action. And it's not like cleverly woven through several subplots to get to this action, to this reaction, to this climax. It's just
Mm.
like one story being threaded only by itself. Like there's no like B stories collapsing to this one. There's no C stories collapsing. It's just this one B story all by itself throughout. At no point do we see any intersection with, Matt's story in the entire Fisk subplot. With that said, I
Yeah.
still enjoyed parts of it. I thought it was funny when he was forced to listen to the kids singing, the Latvian singing. Like he's just so out of his element and he just can't even hide his reaction to being so annoyed and uncomfortable. Like it was very funny. But yeah, no, I absolutely acknowledge that the subplots were not really super refined.
Mm. And what you were saying, that goes into another one of my points. It feels like this season is very fragmented, more like season one, because season one was like episodic and the subplots, I don't think they merged as well. I might have to rewatch it. But if you go back to season two, there were two main plots, and the season just jumped between them. It was Punisher and it was Elektra, and everything was related to at least one of those subplots. Meanwhile, in season three, there were multiple subplots, each having their own main character, but had all of them had Fisk at the center and his schemes with the FBI, whether it was Nadeem, Dex, Matt, Foggy, or Karen, everything connected to at one point. And when the season ended, it made sense why all those plot points had to connect to make that final climax. But this one, right now, it feels like the multiple subplots are barely related to each other, and they also feel more episodic, and I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you just remarked on was more evident in the first few episodes where Fisk and Matt hardly have any interaction. I know there's one interaction in episode one, but otherwise I don't think any interactions. Like they're on completely separate story tracks. The only connected tissue is literally Heather. And even then she says to Matt, I can't talk to you about my patients. It's like a patient confidentiality agreement, like rule. So it's
Yeah.
like there's no intersection as of right now. There's really no
Hmm.
intersection outside of the first episode when I believe Matt and Fisk are both like, as long as you'll mess with me, I won't mess with you. Which
Hmm.
is like that's like kind of saying goodbye. That like your only interaction is like we will not interact is very strange for a show that has two characters in the same show. It's like an
Hmm.
agreement from the two main characters. We will not interact, I promise. Handshake. Like that's just not really how you do subplots ever. Like the whole point of subplots, it helps inform and build on the A plot, or
Hmm.
it helps define the A plot by, by comparison. Like sure, Fisk is corrupt and he's the mayor, so that's in some ways speaks to the argument about the system being flawed. But that point was made already in episode one. Like how are we
Yeah.
still like what new information is being learned about Fisk in the system that we didn't know already? That he keeps a man caged in his house, I guess so. But
Hmm.
like, it's just not really that clinical, in my opinion, the handling of the subplots on this show.
Yeah, and speaking about the caged man, I did like how Fisk lied about not keeping, he didn't know where Adam was, but then it's revealed that he's in his basement or wherever he is. He's keeping him prisoner. I thought that was cool. It shows that Fisk hasn't really changed. And then I also like how they finally answered the Bruce Knuckles in the same scene because they kept showing both of the characters having Bruce Knuckles. And then right here, they parallel the scenes answering the question because Fisk has this dude in his basement and he's probably beating him up. Meanwhile, Matt has been secretly training as Daredevil. And I thought that was a cool way to almost end off the scene. But one of the things I wanted to ask is where did Matt get his suits if the person who made them died in season three?
I don't think he died in season three. He got arrested.
Did he?
Stiltman, Melvin, the bald
Yeah,
guy.
Melvin. Melvin didn't die?
I could swear he got arrested because doesn't he yell at Matt, "Save Betsy"? right? Because
I
like
think so.
Betsy is like his probation officer, so he's still alive when he yells that.
Oh, he's in custody. Okay, okay, my bad. I thought he died.
And I think Fisk remarks like Matt, you left Melvin for the FBI. Like, don't you feel horrible or something? So like he's still alive. And if he
Oh,
was
okay.
dead, like in She-Hulk, there's another designer of suits in She-Hulk who works for
Oh,
Matt.
right. I forgot there was an actual character. Oh, yeah.
But
Okay.
that was the yellow and red suit. It was not like I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Like
I mean,
this show's like not making any reference to She-Hulk whatsoever. So
I am a little disappointed with how they don't explain his suits because if you look at Daredevil season one and two, they show exactly the progression of his suits. They show that he's like, okay, I need body armor because I'm getting cut up. So then he gets body armor. Then he gets the additional staff with the baton that could stretch like a nunchuck. And like they put a lot of attention to detail into the progression of his suit and his abilities. But then in this season, they're like, oh yeah, he has four suits in his cabinet, and we don't know where he even got them from. So I also because he lost his suit in the end of season three. So I feel a little disappointed by the lack of attention to detail. It feels like they're would you say speed running?
speed
Yeah,
running.
yeah.
Yeah, going back to the Adam point, I feel they treated the reveal like it was really dynamic and like the way it's not so much about the writing, but the way that it's shot. Like we are revealing Adam in the cage. I don't know why. Like it's just some guy. It's
I mean, I
literally
liked
just
it
some guy
because they built up
we've
to
never
him
seen
though.
before.
They've been name dropping him, and then they finally show him dramatically. I like that.
I thought it was silly to to give Adam like the Tobey Maguire and No Way Home treatment. Like there's like Adam. I was like, okay, if you say so. I thought that was kind of silly, honestly. Um, yeah, honestly, this is probably one of my least favorite endings for an episode, which is funny because it's probably my favorite episode of the season. But I thought that was just a little silly. I wish there
That's
was a
not how the
better
episode ended.
tease. Oh, Muse, that's right. Muse.
Yeah.
We need to get to.
Yeah.
I rescind that then. I liked how they're handling the Muse teasing. Okay, I take it back. I
Mm,
think Muse has been slow cooking, and I'm enjoying the little fragments I'm seeing, but I do need more. Like I need to see his scenes with Dr. Glenn, with Heather. Like I need to see like some more progression of the Muse character
mm,
because when you tease for too long, I'll just become apathetic. I'll become bored. And I don't
mm.
want to be bored of Muse. I think you have something interesting here, and I would like to see that deepened.
I like the comic accuracy because his outfit looks very accurate, and then he's getting these victims and he's creating art out of their blood, which is the same thing that he did in the comic. So far, I feel like anyone who likes the Muse comic will like what we're seeing so far, but it is a little, we barely get anything. We're not getting that much. And then I'm also worried about how this is going to combine all of the subplots. I still think your theory about how Fisk and Daredevil might unite against him is available, but so far it feels like he's just irrelevant to everything else.
Yeah, I mean, the only main character Muse has met up until this point, we're on episode 4 now of 9, so we're almost at the halfway point, and he's only met Heather.
Mhm.
He hasn't met Matt, he hasn't met Fisk. Like at this point, I'm pretty sure Dex had met Fisk already. I am sure Nadeem had already met Fisk and maybe even Matt, or at least Foggy, but he's trying to find Matt. So he had met like, the main characters have become to settle themselves into like the A story in previous Daredevil seasons, right? At this point, we're halfway through, and it feels like now, like if Muse is the A story, as much as I've been enjoying like the slow teases of Muse, we're at a point where it's like he needs to be in the A story like now, like next episode. We need to start seeing more Muse because it can't be like he comes in late and it's gonna be like a heavy hitter. Because I'll just be wondering why didn't we get to him sooner?
Mhm. I believe by
Like
episode
he,
two and three, Nadim and Dex were already in the story and they had met Fisk. I think two is the one that ends with Dex showing up and killing all the people.
that sounds correct to me. That sounds correct. So, like that show was longer than this one. That was 13 episodes. This is only 8 or 9. I want to say nine
And they're moving
episodes.
faster.
Yeah, and it's just kind of alarming because in some ways like where they're speed running certain plot points because they want to get to the reaction of what needs to happen. And in other ways they're taking their time.
Mhm.
And I just wish we'd hit like a nice medium of both of those.
I agree. The last thing I wanted to say is that we finally see Matt actually shaken up by like Foggy's death. I feel like apart from him screaming after pushing Bullseye off, it felt like he just didn't care about him. He didn't talk about him. He didn't show like dramatic change and emotion like he did with Elektra in season three. So here, him punching, I really like that. I really like that.
Yeah, that was season two, but yeah. I think Matt like being more introspective, and I think this is a really good strength of the Punisher. Whenever he's on screen, he really forces Matt to really reconsider his values, or
Mm,
at least reconsider like his feelings, right? About Foggy, about his like how he let him down, or how Matt probably blames himself for that, which is why he just doesn't talk about it because he just feels so guilt-ridden that he can't get over it. Like that's what kind of dissolved his relationship with Karen was that he feels he can't talk to her anymore. Um, and seeing Punisher kind of force Matt to come to terms with his feelings about Foggy was really, really rewarding as well.
all right, so there was one more thing that I believe you wanted to discuss is how episode two and three were originally one and two. Is there something you want to say about that?
I think it's interesting that if we were just watching this through the original vision, the original writer's vision, that Daredevil has still not showed up in the series yet because episode one of the original draft didn't have Daredevil. We still don't have Daredevil up until this point, and I can see why people thought this was boring because
Mm,
like it's just really rushed plots, like the Hector Ayala plot, the trial. I thought that should have been like 3 to 4 episode arc was two. It was just very sped up. Um,
mm,
and then this episode, which I did enjoy, I kind of feel like we're banking on how much, like, I'm banking primarily on the Angela conversation, the Frank conversation, and the teases of Muse will be a big player eventually. So it's my anticipation of bigger things and some emotional payoffs too. But that all kind of involves Daredevil being an active protagonist and not being so reactive anymore. So if this were
mm,
really the actual show, if this were episode three, right, I would feel
mm,
disappointed
mm.
because like we're really building off of what can happen later instead of what
What's
is
happening
happening
now?
right before our eyes. And I don't think that's really great. How about you?
I agree. I like the introduction action scene, so yeah, I very much agree. But I could kind of see why so much of episode one felt like filler, apart from that first action scene, because they were just trying to build up. They're trying to have a Daredevil scene before what was already written. So like once they got that Daredevil scene out of the way, they just kind of spun their wheels and wasted time. But I think a better solution would have been to, actually build up to the bullseye scene instead of just having it right at the start, make the full episode about the bullseye scene, and then maybe towards the end we get the fight, and then we get this dude running as mayor, and then we cut to next episode instead of just wasting a bunch of time for most of the episode.
I honestly feel like there's really no fast solution or easy fix to what we're seeing because like the major issue that we see in the original version is that Fisk and Matt just don't intersect, which means that there is a lot of time for the first few episodes where there's no crossover. I mean, it's just really it's jarring to watch this because I can feel the lack of crossover between the A story and the B story.
Mhm.
So like having even having Daredevil suit up, that wouldn't fix all your problems because I can feel this disconnect between the episode within itself. I can feel characters just not crossing over and meeting each other, and A plots merging to B plots, or B plots merging to C plots. There's just nothing. It's just the Matt story and the Fisk story.
Mm.
So it's hard to say like any one thing could fix this besides
Rewriting it.
like yeah, rewriting from scratch and having like Daredevil and or Matt and Fisk actually interact with each other.
Okay, so finally, I wanted to talk about kind of the issues with this episode and a little bit about the episode, the season in total. The first one is the speed running, which we brought up a lot. There's been a lack of setup and payoff, and things are kind of rushed to. For example, Matt breaking his kill rule in the first episode that could have been brilliantly built up to like be the climax of the season. That didn't really happen. There's a Nikki chase scene where it just kind of suddenly happens, and they use like an editing trick to get around it. That wasn't good. The Hector case, it was just one episode. Meanwhile, you look at previous seasons, the case, they build it up for multiple episodes. There's a Union Buster plot line, which kind of just comes up and seemingly gets resolved in the same episode. I didn't think I didn't think that was great. I don't like the way speedrunning. What do you think about that?
Yeah, like I've definitely noticed that they will rush to get to a certain point, like plot development. Like Hector dying was very important to the plot, but
Mm,
you really felt like there should have been 3 to 4 episodes establishing the court arc. Like a very good um legal drama could have been had leading up to Hector's death, and we just didn't have that because I feel like the writers just want to get to the point. They're cutting to the chase, which is Hector dies, and this leads to like this crooked cops arc. It leads to like a bigger arc that doesn't involve the court drama. So maybe they're like, I don't want to spend time like writing an intricate web of court drama when it's not that important to the larger narrative. But the problem is when you're watching leading up to the larger narrative, I feel like we are not really engaged in a very well articulated legal drama. So that's the issue I had with the speed running there.
And this is also the connection to lack of attention to detail, which kind of connects back to speedrunning because, like you said, there's a lack of legal expertise. The way he finds Frank's cave is just sudden. The way he has multiple Daredevil armors, that's sudden. But then what's interesting is that on the opposite end, they're also, as you said, slow cooking a lot of the subplots. And instead of focusing on those interesting ones, they're focusing on the less interesting ones and giving them more screen time. Like using Heather. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I definitely. I noticed that we are on episode 4 now. We technically we're on episode 5 since 4 is already resolved. So we're basically on episode 5 of 9 episodes, right? And
Mhm.
we're at the midpoint. And as of right now, no one knows anything about Muse. We don't know his name. We don't know his motive. We don't know his goals. We know he kills people, but what is his goals? Like presumably to make art out of his dead victims, right? But like there's no clearly defined goals, and we're at the midpoint. This is
Mhm.
very strange to not know anything about your main villain this deep into your story. Um, it's very jarring and it's strange. What's the strangest thing is that there's a very easy way to articulate his character, his motives, his goals, his origins, his past. It's just having back and forth scenes with Heather Glenn in therapy. If you just have him talking to Heather, we will learn so much more about his character. And if you can like weave those things into the previous plots of previous episodes. Like imagine if Hector or if Heather has like an interview session with Muse and
Mhm.
she hears a little about his past and his troubledness or something. And when she's talking to Matt, she's like upset about a case and she just says, "Ugh, there's this one person. So and she just describes a little bit, not about who it is because that's breaking
Mhm.
rules, but just like kind of like hinting at the Muse story just so you can intersect some A and B stories. Let them kind of cross over a little bit, because the lack of like A and B story crossover is very strange as well, which is kind of the next point.
Yeah, they don't really merge subplots. What about Powell? How do you feel about that?
I think Powell is deceptively one of the best characters in the series because when we introduce to him, we think he's a corrupt cop, and he probably is, that he's evil and he's trying to set up Hector to take the fall for Shanahan's death, which was obviously an accident. And the weird thing is, we all assumed that Powell had some involvement in Hector's death, but Matt kind of like asks him point blank, like, "Did you have something to do with it?" I think you did, and Powell says no, definitively. And we hear there is no skip in his heartbeat, meaning that he's telling the truth. So now the writers have given us, the audience, a contradiction, which is that we think he's dirty, but he clearly did not have any knowledge or involvement in Hector's death.
Mhm.
Now that we have a contradiction, I want to learn more about why. Like, I want to figure this out. I want to pin down his character. I want to understand what is his involvement in the criminal conspiracy that got that one informant Nikki caught up in this whole saga. What is his involvement, if any, in Hector's death? How dirty is he? Like, I want to learn everything to do with Powell, and we don't have anything about him. We just have the
Mhm.
contradiction, which is interesting, but also feels like this should have happened already. We should be exploring and deepening the Powell story instead of now beginning to ask questions about who Powell really is.
Just like the Muse and Heather subplot and the Powell subplot seem to be the most interesting ones, but they're also the ones that get the least amount of screen time. Instead, they want to focus on things like Red Hook, the Union, and Leroy. And that's a little upsetting. And as you said before, they're not really merging the subplots really well. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is how sometimes in the dialogue there's no pushback and it makes the dialogue feel weaker and it makes the writers feel a little more preachy. and it's just not as good as it used to be in like seasons 1 through 3. For example, the Leroy scene, like we talked about. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've really highlighted the Leroy scene for not having a lot of back and forth, which lacks dynamic, um, any dynamic storytelling because Leroy is not challenged in his like interpretation of events or his interpretation of the court system. Um, so that's disappointing. I just think the story should really focus on events where the characters are at odds with each other. Like honestly, like Matt and Frank was a very good example of that, but I would also like to see maybe like Matt and Powell like come to because that scene where he's talking about like
Hmm.
my granddad was a cop and like we've defended the city for literally it's like the family business and him pushing back against Matt. That was interesting. I want to see more of this kind of conflict. Like conflict doesn't just mean fighting. It could just be two people talking.
Hmm.
And sometimes the show does that well, but I just wish we did that more.
I agree. Well, did you have anything else to say? Because that's all I have in my notes.
Well, guys, that's all from us today. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next time on the Podcraft.